Well, I was hoping to avoid this topic, but it looks like I finally have to jump on the bandwagon and say something about Borisgate. Now, apparently, Boris Johnson, who is the favorite currently to become the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the leader of the Tory party there, he apparently got into some kind of argument with his girlfriend, and there was a bunch of shouting, and I guess his next-door neighbors don't like him very much. They seem, at least, some people are saying this is a smear, other people are saying this is fair. They're being called leftists by, the right-wing media in the UK, which is not necessarily true. They could just not like him for other reasons. They could just think he's a bad neighbor. They could think, hey, he's always making noise over there. Maybe they kind of have, some wild nights, him and his girlfriend, and so they wanted to get back at him. So they called the cops to come, mess with him. Which I think is a dirty trick, using the cops to mess with people, but I'd much rather, egg his house or something. But anyway, they called the cops and said that there was a fight going on, and so, of course, the cops had to go check out and make sure that he wasn't beating up his girlfriend or something. And of course, she didn't have any visible damage. She didn't say that he hit her or anything. Cops couldn't find anything wrong, so they went back to the precinct, or whatever they call it in the UK, their equivalent of the precinct. And Boris and his girlfriend went to bed, and that was that. However, of course, the cops being called to a prospective prime minister's house is going to be big news. But considering that nothing came of it, you would think, oh, well, people get into arguments sometimes. Sure, the cops were called, but nothing happened. Nobody was arrested. No charges were filed. There was no evidence of any wrongdoing. However, Boris's neighbors were prudent enough to record the conversation between Mr. Johnson and his girlfriend through their shared wall. Now, the type of dwelling that Mr. Johnson occupies is in the UK referred to as a flat. Here in the US, we would call those a townhouse. It's very similar to what we see in a lot of urban areas, at least older urban areas. New urban areas, they don't really build townhouses anymore. But essentially, or row houses, we also call them. But, they're those tall, skinny houses that are always 2 stories with, a door and then 2 windows on the first floor, or a door and 1 window. In Mr. Johnson's case, it's a door and 2 windows. So it's a pretty narrow, probably deep house and tall. And so you've got a lot of shared wall between you and your neighbors. Now, from the picture that I saw, it looks like Mr. Johnson only has a neighbor on one side because he's an end unit. And so that one neighbor, I guess, just got out their phone and started recording. And the walls must be pretty thin. I'm not sure when it was built, but obviously there isn't brick between each unit, because apparently they were able to record an audible conversation, a shouting match, as it were, between Mr. Johnson and his girlfriend, and they pass that on to The Guardian. Now, The Guardian apparently has not released the actual audio tape. They've only pulled certain quotes with no context and put them out there. And the worst one, from what I understand, is an instance in which his girlfriend says, "Get off of me." Now, get off of me could mean anything. That could mean, step off in a colloquial sense. That could mean hey, get off my back. That doesn't literally mean get off my back. Or it could mean that Mr. Johnson was trying to assault her. We don't know. And frankly, I don't see why anyone would care that much, because if there really was a problem, I think that the police would have been able to detect that, and they would have been able to see that, perhaps she'd been hit, or if she had any problem, if she thought that they had a real serious fight between the two of them, she could have told the cops, hey, he hit me, or hey, I feel unsafe, or she could have just, broken up with him. It is 2019. Women do have agency in this day and age, and they can make their own decisions. And so the fact that this woman has not broken up with Mr. Johnson, to me, says all that I need to know. If she's okay with him, then he's probably doing an okay job. And that's not to say that there aren't women who stay with abusive men. There certainly are. And if you had, a guy who was abusing his wife or his girlfriend become the prime minister, that probably wouldn't be great. Now, I think that there are a lot of prime ministers who have done worse things than, hit their wife, like, say, Tony Blair, who was complicit in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. But, hey, everyone has their priorities, like Mr. Jeremy Hunt, who's just very concerned for Boris's girlfriend. He wants to know the truth behind all this matter and what's going on, because Jeremy Hunt certainly wouldn't want anyone to be hurt. I mean, on top of being a total defender of the rights of women and very suspicious of any man who would shout at a woman, Jeremy Hunt is also, as you would expect, of someone who deplores violence, very virulently anti-war. Oh, wait. No, he's not. He's, in fact, the most pro-war guy who I think was even running for the Tory leadership post. And, in fact, when you listen to him talk, he kind of sounds like a State Department spokesperson. And frankly, I mean, Mr. Hunt, I don't know where he went to college, or I guess university, as you folks like to call it over in the UK. But he talks like someone who has a degree in international relations from George Washington University, i.e. he's very well versed in American talking points, which I find kind of odd in a British politician. I mean, I would think that the UK, politicians would have their own sorts of talking points on foreign policy, but really, Mr. Hunt just talks like an American to me. I mean, he could be Lindsey Graham or Michael McFaul or Mike McCall. Sorry, not McFaul. Now, for Mr. Hunt, this is really all he has going for him, from as far as I can see. Perhaps you in the comments section, if you're a supporter of Mr. Hunt, perhaps you could point out some other redeeming qualities to me. But as far as I can see, his big focus seems to be, well, at least right now, he's very open to going to war with Iran. In fact, to him, it's a foregone conclusion that the U.S. is going to enter the war, and he wants the U.K. to enter in with him for some ungodly reason. And that, I would imagine, is a very unpopular position in the United Kingdom. I'm surprised that he's even articulating it during this leadership election, considering that he's well far behind in the polls already, and I don't think that's going to help him. I think that this Boris Gate thing is really his last gasp of life as far as his candidacy goes, and it probably won't be enough. I think you're still going to have Mr. Boris be the PM. I don't think that there's anybody really forecasting anything else other than that at this point. So hopefully the UK media, which is really mostly tabloidy at this point, could get over this story and maybe focus on more important things. I think that The Guardian actually, even though they're pretty bad on most domestic things, I tend to like The Guardian as far as foreign policy stuff is concerned, since they do send reporters to places that don't get covered a whole lot. I tend to think that the British press covers American foreign policy a lot better on the whole than the U.S. mainstream media by far. And perhaps if I were them, instead of trying to drum up this nonsensical story about Boris supposedly beating his girlfriend, even though there's no evidence of that, I would be more focused on Mr. Hunt's proclivities. If I were The Guardian, I would be running front page stories about the latest bombing in Yemen and asking Mr. Hunt if he wants the UK to be engaged in that as well. Whether I would ask Mr. Hunt, how many dead kids are okay with you? When does the cost become too high of whatever it is your latest foreign policy goals are for the Middle East? And now, I'm no left-winger, but I mean, for that reason alone, I would have to think that Jeremy Hunt would be a far more undesirable figure to have as Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. But hey, what do I know? I shouldn't try and get inside the left's head. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, and frankly, I don't know how you could have, this is a very dumb story, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow with hopefully a not-so-stupid story.